Chapter 8, Rockhound Shadow. Nice intro music. Can we keep this one for now? Joe struggled desperately. He had already used up most of the air in his lungs even before he was attacked. Now he was being gripped behind the surface, unable to call or signal for help. Joe kicked and thrashed, but he could not free himself from the attacker's iron grip. The only result was a tightening of pressure against his Adam's apple and a vicious jab in the ribs. When Joe tried to squirm around to face his assailant, the man rode with him. Joe's lungs were soon near the bursting point. If only he could reach the surface! Aboard the Napoli, Frank began to worry. What's Joe doing down there? He muttered. Maybe he met a mermaid, Tony quipped lazily. As Frank scanned the waters, he noticed an uprush of air bubbles around 100 years away. But wordlessly, he plunged over the surface. Cutting his way downward, Frank peered intently through the wavering, transparent green. His heart pounded what he saw. Joe was helpless in the grip of a goggled frogman. As Frank stroked swiftly toward him, the frogman released his victim and swam off. I hope I'm not too late, Frank thought, frankly. Joe was limp. His head was sagging as he slowly floated upward. Frank grabbed him from under the arms and hauled him to the surface. Joe! Tony! Give us a hand! Frank shouted as he broke the water. Tony had been watching anxiously for the sight of the Hardy Boys, and at Frank's call, he sent the Napoli gliding toward them. In a few moments, they had Joe safely aboard. Get back on the dock, fast! Frank exclaimed. He positioned Joe as best as he could in the bottom of the boat and quickly began applying mouth-to-mouth respiration. The Napoli went planing over the water toward the shore, and then jouncing made Frank's efforts doubly difficult. But by bracing himself against the side, he managed to hold Joe fairly steadily. Tony cut the engine and yelled for help as he brought the boat slide to the dock. 4 men assisted the boys in lifting Joe out of the Napoli. Then they laid him full length on the dock. Frank quickly resumed mouth-to-mouth respiration. I've called an ambulance, someone shouted, but Joe was already reviving. Frank breathed a silent prayer of thanks. Boy, you sure had a close call, Tony said, squatting down beside Joe. You're telling me, Joe grinned weakly. I must have swallowed half of Barma Bay. By the time the ambulance had arrived, Joe was on his feet. He allowed the intern to examine him, but refused to be taken to the hospital. Nothing doing, I'm okay, he insisted. Well, I can't force you, the intern grinned and turned to Frank. At least take him home and put him to bed for a while. Once they were seated in the convertible and the ambulance had departed, Joe protested. Listen, I'm not sleepy. Why should I go to bed? He argued. Then you'd have to tell Mom what happened and think of the fuss that Aunt Gertrude would make. Okay, if you're sure you feel alright. As the boys walked toward the dock, Joe said, The frogman who attacked me must have come from the cabin cruiser in the cove, he reasoned. I think that cruiser was pulling out because Frank and I started sunbathing. Tony objected. Joe could still be right. The cruiser could have left and arranged to pick up the frogman somewhere else, Frank pointed out. It's a cinch he could have been lurking on the shore. He couldn't have been lurking on the shore, just waiting for us to show up. He didn't even know ourselves that we might have been going to a particular spot to swim. I guess you're right, Tony agreed, frowning thoughtfully. Must have been just bad luck, I guess. The cruiser spotted us, and whoever was aboard decided that it was a perfect chance to nail at least one of the Hardys. The boys boarded the Napoli and made a quick scouting troop back to the cove. The cruiser was nowhere in sight, and neither Tony nor the Hardys had paid enough attention to the craft to be able to identify it. Nor had Frank seen the frogman clearly enough to provide the police with useful description. The boys dressed aboard the Napoli and headed back to the dock, and Frank and Joe said goodbye to Tony and drove home. Chet Morton's tomato red jalopy was parked in the front of the house. A girl was seated among the porch rockers. That's Isla, they exclaimed as they drove up. She came running to meet them as they got out of the car. Oh, thank goodness, Joe, Isla said excitedly. I was afraid you might not get back in time. Something wrong? Frank asked. I think I found the man who started an atheist. At least we think you know where he is. Where? Joe blurted. I'll explain that she, Callie, and Chet had been gone rock hunting again that morning in the hills outside Bayport. When they were trying to locate the spot where the girls had picked up the amethyst, they glimpsed a man trailing them at the distance. Did it look like the fellow who questioned you at the drum shop? Frank put in. He was sulking too far behind and ducking out of sight whenever we looked back, I said, so we couldn't be for sure. Where are Chet and Callie? Joe asked. They stayed behind. They made fire and now they're having lunch, acting like nothing's wrong, but Chet told me to sneak back to the car and get you two. Okay, hop in your jelly pea and lead the way, Frank said. We'll follow you. Isla drove into the hills west of Bayport, and Frank and Joe stayed close behind the convertible. Finally, Jellypy pulled off the road, and the Hardys parked nearby. We'll have to do some walking, Isla said. A few minute hike brought them to a hill overlooking a narrow ravine. Isla explained that Chet and Callie were waiting just beyond, and the man who was shadowing us is down there somewhere among those rocks and shrubs. At least he was when I left to get you. Yeah, perfect setup, Joe gloated. Frank, suppose you and I go down the ravine at this end and flush him out. Then he'll either have to break for high ground or go right past Chet. Frank agreed to the plan, and the boys wound their way down the hillside and to the floor of the ravine. Isla headed along the brow of the hill to rejoin Chet and Callie. The Hardys spread out, searching among brush and boulders. 20 minutes later, they emerged from the opposite end of the small canyon, their faces registering disappointment. Chet and the girls ran out to meet them. Did you find them? Chet asked. Frank shook his head. Nah, but there's only signs he was there. We spotted a trail of a broken bush where someone climbed out of the ravine. Chet's moon face said, Rats, I thought for sure we could nab him. I'll bet he guessed that Isla went for help, Callie put in. So he decided we better not stay around. The Hardys drove home, eager to tackle their investigation of Ad and Darrow, and Miss Hardy informed them that Jack Wayne had telephoned from the airport, and Frank had called him back. Strang landed about an hour ago, Jack reported. I tried to reach you but couldn't. Anyone with him? Frank inquired eagerly. Just the pilot, Al Harif. That sports car didn't show up, but another car did. A tough-looking guy met them off and drove off with Strang. What about Harif? Still here at the airport. Tried to strike up a conversation with him, no luck. Good work, Jack, Frank said. Keep it trying. Frank passed the news to Joe, and the boys ate a quick lunch of sandwiches and lemon pie, then prepared to place a long-distance call to the Western State University. Before they could do so, the telephone rang. Joe answered. This is Mr. Fillmore at the gym shop, said the voice at the other end. Oh yes, Mr. Fillmore. Is there anything up? Well, a man came into my shop a while ago with 3 stones that he wanted me to praise. I don't know what sort of mystery you boys are working on, but I thought you may want to know. The stones were amethysts. What will Frank and Joe do? Will they try to figure out who gave the amethyst? I guess all you have to do is stay tuned for Chapter 9.